Today we're going to talk about Chapter 9 on defensiveness. This is critical in our understanding of being more effective in communication and our relationships across various contexts. So we want to look at this in detail. I've added some information here. I've actually enhanced some that they talk about in the book as well. But this is a critical chapter because we can come up with strategies to resolve conflict easier if we understand how to reduce or avoid defensiveness, because defensiveness blurs everything with lots of intense emotion and all kinds of other feelings where people feel pain. So we want to look at this closely, and we'll spend more time on this than actually on conflict, because reducing defensiveness in other people as well as in ourselves is key to being able to grow through any conflicts or situations that are problematic that we experience. So we want to review some points, page 163, about the idea that we have these two selves. These two selves, right, are you have the perceived self, the private self, right? This is who we think we are as a person. And we also want to look at the presenting self, or the presenting public face. This is how we want others to see us. This is why we only self-disclose to a small number of people. We disclose information that can hurt us. So we want to keep this presenting self intact as much as we can. And so when it's threatened, right, we're going to respond defensively. It's a natural thing for humans to do, is to react in a defensive way at times. So we want to look at how, sometimes these two selves can be actually quite similar and not have a lot of differences. Maybe, that old phrase, what you see is what you get, that you're pretty honest and you don't hide a lot of things or try to present too much of a facade to people. But that varies between different people. So if you'll notice in that bullet point before the last bullet point on your notes, right, when it's when the attributes of the two selves, right, presenting self and private self, it's when they contradict each other, right? These face-threatening acts happen, and when we contradict each other, we're going to be compelled to act defensively. So in other words, if I want to be seen in my presenting self in a way that I'm, let's say, very honest with people, and I want to be perceived as honest, but I have some people who know that I've been dishonest in some kind of way, then if somebody wants to try to say something then about me in that sense, and show somebody that I've been dishonest in some kind of way, then I'm going to react defensively. So that's one example. So you should be able to think of other ones. So these are face-threatening acts when someone brings something up, right, and you're going to react defensively to it because you're trying to preserve this presenting self to other people. So that's generally when defensiveness happens. I'm not saying you can't be defensive in other ways, but it really has a lot to do with the fact that we don't think our perceived self is going to be damaged. It's more about what other people think about us. That's important to us, to varying degrees in different contexts and according to you and your personality experience, right? So we want to look at a couple of other things that have to do with decreasing defensiveness that they don't necessarily talk about. And that's the idea of communication climate is important for us to know. This is the emotional tone of a relationship, the communication climate. It's a simple idea, actually, but it's important. So this is where it's created really by how people communicate, right, to each other in a way that values or respects one another. Okay, so in other words, the way we feel about, the way we treat other people, right? This is going to help to create that communication climate. So it can change quite quickly. You could have a positive climate, and then it can turn negative with just one comment from someone. So I think when we talked about emotional contagion before, we talked about that idea of that we can catch people's emotions. And this is related to that, in that if you begin to send messages that are what we call disconfirming, a disconfirming message is one that devalues the person to whom you're communicating. It does not value them. It does not give them positive regard as a human being. When you use disconfirming messages, you are not talking to someone with respect. You are not respect. Doesn't mean you have to agree. Respect is not the same as agree. All right, that's an important distinction that many people haven't learned, have trouble with putting into practice. So it's important. So you want to use confirming messages rather than disconfirming messages. And if you catch yourself being disconfirming, that can come from lots of places while you do that, then you can stop. You can stop at any time. You can't control somebody else, but you can control how you communicate. And so that means, right, that you don't have to keep on sending those disconfirming messages, because it becomes a problem. So confirming messages conveys valuing of the other person to them. It conveys that you value them. And disconfirming shows a lack of regard, and you're communicating that they don't have value. So that's an extremely simple but important basic idea that will help you grow and maintain relationships in a positive, healthy way. All right, so you'll see a few things here at the bottom, a few notes with the check marks. Couples who create, right, and maintain emotionally healthy, positive climates, they have happy, enduring relationships, because you're going to endure. If you stay with disconfirming messages, then you're going to start to withdraw from one another, like what we talked about in relationships, the stages. So, other ways it affects it, again, children who are in a positive environment, and I think most of us know this, have a higher self-esteem, right? They're lower levels of stress. They get along with each other as far as siblings go better, and disconfirming messages decrease. So it's important, and I've seen that happen in my own home. Whenever somebody starts with a disconfirming message, it's going to go downhill unless you stop and you get that turned around, right? So this obviously, if you have a positive communication climate, it fosters positive and productive work in your relationships. I can tell you, and I may have mentioned this before, but the classroom is a good way, which we're not getting to be in right now. But you've had classroom experience, and I know there was one it was in another state. So undergraduate teacher taught history, and he was determined to keep a negative communication climate in that class. He seemed to make it his mission to demean people in class. So it did not have it wasn't a positive experience. While I got through it, because I just tried to do what was expected of me, but I didn't get to gain much from really great class discussion, which is an excellent learning tool. So it affected that relationship. It affected what I really was able to gain from that experience. So it is important, and certainly an instructor as the head of the class is going to have some responsibility in setting that tone of that relationship, that climate, but also trying to, putting forth the effort to correct it. Because sometimes it's not something that the teacher has done or said. It can be something that another student has said. And so it's about learning to manage that climate, and keep coming back and trying to create again, it's not about trying to hide ugly facts, things that are painful. It's about treating people with respect. That's the bottom line with that. All right, so the next thing that what they do is they talk about Jack Gibbs' chart, but they split it up in the book. So what I'm going to do right now is just, if you have your books and you go to page 166 to 168, we'll just hit on a couple of things there, because they talk about the fight or flight issue. So, and I'm trying to see, okay. All right. And then we will come back to the communication mechanisms. So, all right. But I do want to point out that, you know, with fight or flight, which is kind of in the middle of your page on page 2, you'll see, I can see I've skipped some. So we'll go back and pick that up. I'm sorry. But let's go ahead and go to the top of the page, and then we'll come back to this. So at the top of page 2, all right, you see how they develop, and I've already been talking about this. And again, this is a reminder about content and relational dimensions, right? Content is the information that's contained in the message, but the relational dimension is how you feel about the other person. So that's important, all right? That's important because that's where you can get into these confirming and disconfirming situations as well. You know, with these messages, if it's disconfirming, it's going to be hostile, it's going to be cold, it's on the defensive. Confirming is going to stay positive. It's just going to stay positive. I'm willing to hear. I'm willing to listen to you. I want you to be able to listen to what I have to say and what I think. And so it's about treating that person with respect. So what I wanted to say, because I did jump ahead of myself, is these spirals can develop with this, with disconfirming messages, particularly. And you can have an escalatory spiral, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a spiral, right, that's going up in intensity, all right? It's created as you get because one disconfirming attack generally begets another one, and you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until it escalates out of control, all right? So it's just going to get worse. And I see this happen often with the 2 siblings that live with me. So my kids, they definitely can get into that very easily. And it's about stopping that from happening. You have to put a stop to it one way or another. We have to learn to do that. They're destructive to relationships of all kinds. So now, a de-escalatory spiral, while it sounds good, actually is not a good thing either. And that is destructive as well, because what happens with this is it's not escalating with verbal attacks like the escalatory one. The de-escalatory one means you're withdrawing. You're just spending less and less time around that person. And so obviously ignoring those things, using avoidance and withdrawing, that's destructive to your relationship as well. So, and spirals, again, rarely go on indefinitely. They are going to stop at some point. Most relationships go through cycles like this. Inevitably, it's about somebody wanting to turn things around, wanting to be more positive, wanting to, right, grow the relationship. So you can switch to positive messages at any time. Anytime. You always have that choice, right? You always have that choice. So defensiveness is something that comes to us naturally. It's not, it can be harmful. We just need to realize it's happening in ourselves and when it's happening in others and why that's going on. So the fight or flight, again, is on 166 to 168. So when we go there, they talk, I mean, of course, in your notes that I gave you, fight or flight, this is that response that we have that we've talked about before, right? Rationalizations, sarcasm, right? Contradictory verbal and nonverbal messages, you know, verbal aggression, all of those things happen with a fight where you're actually using words, you're being aggressive with the nonverbal and the verbal messages. Flight, again, though, is more about avoidance, displacement, changing the subject, right? Acting like we don't care, all of those kinds of things, and actually physically walking out of an altercation that's going on. So what we need to do is to realize it's happening, and we need to learn how to reduce defensiveness in ourselves and in others. And we want to look at strategies of how we can do that, because it's key. Because when we're on the defensive, everything is distorted, okay? Emotions are generally taking over, and we're going to say things that hurt people because we're on the defensive, or we want to know how to keep other people from being defensive. Now, you don't have complete control over this. So we have to realize that too, just like we have from the beginning of the semester. We can't control other people, but you have a lot better chance at being effective in resolving issues in a relationship if you can recognize defensiveness, what's causing it, and being able to recognize those things. So what we want to do now is look at the Gibbs, and I put what they have over several different pages in a chart. So, and you can look through on 166 to 168. They expand on what I have in the notes about the fight and flight, especially the flee mechanisms. They get into more different strategies people will try to do. They'll expand on that somewhat. So again, you can take a look at that. But what we really want to focus on, after looking at these things and realizing why we might be doing it and how we're being defensive, how we're showing that we're on the defensive, is by finding out how we can eliminate defensive behavior. So they're actually starting to talk about Gibbs on page 169. So what we want to do, you should have your chart. It's a landscape chart of notes that I gave you. And this way you can see, because this is how Jack Gibbs laid it out. We have defense arousing behaviors on your left as you look at the page, and supportive behaviors on your right that reduce defensiveness, all right, or prevent it from happening. So, and they're in pairs, right, across the page. So you have judgmental statements using you language, like you're, I mean, we've used some of these before. Well, you're lazy, that kind of thing. Those are obviously going to arouse defensive, judgmental you statements. Instead of saying something, again, like we've practiced before, you use I language about the speaker's thoughts and feelings, right? I'm disappointed that you haven't cleaned your room. That's definitely something I say occasionally. So I'm disappointed that you haven't cleaned your room, all right? So you want to focus on your thoughts, your feelings as a speaker, but don't use judgmental you statements, because all you're going to get most likely is defensiveness. All right. Okay. The next one is control versus problem orientation. So in control, what you're looking at is the sender is imposing a solution on that receiver of the message with little regard for that receiver's needs, right, or their interests. It's an attempt to control another person. Nobody wants to be controlled. Nobody likes to be controlled. I mean, that is something we're definitely going to respond defensively to. We don't need to be controlled. So instead of imposing a solution, right, we want problem orientation when we send messages to someone, focusing on finding a solution that's going to satisfy both needs of those involved, right? In arrangement where everybody feels like they have won, they have gained what they wanted. Decisions are made with people rather than for people, right? And so, and I can talk about the kids again, because when they're younger, there's a lot more control that you have to use. But then as they're becoming more independent, right, you're going to have to use some more problem orientation at times, so that they can practice that, having a say in solving a problem, because that shows people that you value them, so they're not going to be on the defensive, and that their opinion matters. If you try to control, their opinion doesn't matter. All right. Okay. The next one is strategy versus spontaneity. So strategy, this is where, again, speakers are using their ulterior motives. They're being sneaky, manipulative, dishonest to get what they want, and people generally do find this out, and when they find out, it's going to destroy a relationship. It's definitely going to hit it that way. So nobody appreciates that kind of use of strategy, and spontaneity we like much better. That just means being honest rather than manipulating someone. So if you send mixed messages to people, if you're not clear, if you're not honest, okay, it's going to come back and damage that relationship. All right. So it's best to be honest with people rather than manipulate people. All right. And some of this I'm sure you probably already know, but you don't know the chart. So, and then we have neutrality versus empathy. Neutrality is where you're showing indifference to what people think or feel or want, to communicate a lack of concern. You imply that the welfare of the other person isn't very important to you at all. It's not of consequence. And if you do that, you're dismissing the other person, which is, again, is another type of disconfirming message. all right, is to, you should just act like that doesn't matter. It's simply, you're just neutral. You don't care. Where instead you should be using empathy, right? Accepting another person's feelings, not agreeing and accepting are different too. I mean, you may wonder why they feel a certain way, but they do. If they feel that way, they feel that way. So accepting another person's feeling, putting yourself in someone's shoes, right? Putting yourself in their place helps to eliminate that perception of indifference. Even if you don't agree in what someone's doing, what decisions they've made, or you know, what they want to accomplish, even if you disagree with all of that, ultimately you need to indicate to the other person that it matters. It matters because you can understand, you know, put yourself in their shoes so you can at least understand their perception, right? And that you are coming across in a way that values them, what they think and feel, what they're going through, okay? Superiority versus equality. So superiority, right, is any message that suggests I am better than you, okay? I am better than you, I'm more important than you, I have more value than you, all right? This can be in content, or it could be in the nonverbals as well. So in the relational dimension, so it can be in the facts, but it can also be in how it's said. All right. You know, if I just said I'm better than you, that doesn't have the same effect as saying I'm better than you. All right. So that makes a difference too. But superiority is going to put people off. Right. We know this from experience. Superiority messages that come from that way are going to create defensiveness in people, whereas messages that show equality, right, that use equality, this is better. This is more effective and maintains a positive climate. So regardless of whether the person has superior skills or talents, you want to convey the attitude they see others as having just as much worth as having as human beings. So in other words, this is called unconditional positive regard, right? So regardless of whether a person has these skills or talents, conveying the attitude, all right, to other people that they have just as much worth as you. In other words, it doesn't matter if a celebrity wants to say what they want to say about politics, but it's not worth any more than what another person thinks. I mean, that's just, we're not really talking, now if we get into expertise and we know someone has a lot of knowledge on something, that's different, and we will tend to say, well, I know they've got more information than I do, all right? But regardless, that even if I have more, I've been teaching communication a long time, even though that does not mean that I don't look at you as equal. You're a human being. You communicate every day. So we're all working with this idea of how do we do this effectively? How do we communicate effectively? And I have to do the same thing. So, and you may know things that I don't know. So, and have experiences. All right, that I haven't had. Certainty versus provisionalism. So a certainty is where a person insists on being right and they really won't listen to anything else. They insist they know all the facts. They disregard anything anybody else wants to add to it because they've just said, I've already made up mine. I already know what I'm thinking. You know, I know that I am right. That kind of attitude. Well, that causes defensiveness in someone else because it doesn't give them an opportunity to say, yeah, but maybe look at this, or what have you thought about this, or I'm actually thinking this. That you can still listen and take that kind of information and those opinions in. So that's what provisionalism does. Provisionalism means a speaker can have strong opinions, and the speaker's willing to acknowledge, right, that she or he could change their stance, provided that other position seems reasonable to them. It's just the idea of being open to listening. Being open to listening. That's important that we do that, because it shows that you will allow someone to share what they're thinking, and it may give you, you know, some more information that you have not looked at before or have not known. And so just the act of doing it, even if you don't change your mind on something, shows respect to the other person and reduces defensiveness. Okay, so that's what those are, and so be thinking about those. We'll be doing an exercise on that. All right, so what we have left now, all right, is on page 3. Right, yeah. Decreasing your own defensiveness. on set 171 to 172, and I will turn there. Then we're going to go over the assertive message format and responding non-defensively to criticism. So on 171, this is what I'm doing in the classroom, right? 171, I get there. And again, it's not like I'm wanting you to memorize a list, right? But if you look, starting at the bottom of 171, right, ways to decrease your own defensiveness. Again, remember, too, if we're defensive, that's going to beget more defensiveness. There's going to be reciprocation going on, so we don't want that to happen. So all you have control over is you. So these are some ways. Learn what kinds of things trigger your defensiveness. Kind of take note of those so that you can, again, reappraise how you're looking at it, because defensiveness raises emotion as well. So we want to kind of go back to that emotion chapter some with this and be thinking, how can I look at this differently? Because what are the habitual things? There are certain things that tend to set different people off, little triggers, all right? Same thing with the emotions. So there's certain emotions that tend to lead you to be more defensive. If you're irritable, do you tend to be more defensive? If you're mentally fatigued, do you get on the defensive? I mean, there can be a lot of different things. If you're angry, are you more defensive? So we want to separate again. Sometimes we want to think about back to emotions, what the activating events are that's causing that emotion, so we can kind of get that under control. Of course, they have the de-stressing, which you've probably heard of before, or count to 10 or 100 or whatever it is that you need to do, and taking deep breaths. And don't react in your typical defensive manner. I mean, catch yourself is really what it is. And it can be difficult sometimes because sometimes we have these habits. We have certain triggers that seem to consistently set us off into defensiveness. So, and then on 172, don't use interpersonal communication, self-talk that's pessimistic and negative. This goes back to not dwelling on debilitative emotion, not ruminating. So again, we're going back to there again. And then give yourself a do-over. Start again, calmer, less. It's really okay to do that. Say, okay, and maybe you're the one that started the whole defensiveness issue, and stopping, saying, okay, can we just, let's just forget everything we've said and let's try to start over. Or let's wait and talk about this again tomorrow when I have a cool head and have been able to calm down, or I feel better, or whatever it is that you need to do. All right. So, and again, they say it's easy to make a list of suggestions and more difficult to actually pull them off. It really comes through training yourself that you're going to catch yourself when you realize you're reacting defensively, okay, and engage in some self-talk to talk yourself out of that defensiveness and actually approach working on what the problem is, okay.